one step ahead. What do you mean by that?
My last year of school, of high school, I had started getting compliments for dancing, the way that I wore my clothes, etc. So I spent that summer preparing for college and reading up on how to put your best foot forward, and I was going to dazzle these people. It's terrible to admit, but that was my goal. I was going to dazzle these people and have this wide circle of friends. And the phrase that it's nice to have a black friend back from the late 60s. I think that was very prevalent, and everybody seemed to want to be your friend. And so that was intentionally what I did, and it worked. It worked. I started to blossom as a social person.
Big man on campus.
Pretty near, yes. Picture in the college paper quite regularly, and into drama and the student union and the whole work. So it worked, and it was all purposeful. And I started to see that, like as I said earlier, it was something that it was a time when black was beautiful. Buttons were popping up in the States and everything, and you could hold your head up high and go out and say, "Here I am," and people didn't seem to mind at that time.
At that time, you were studying to go into radio, weren't you?
Right.
So what were some of your goals back then, other than being big man on campus?
Okay, back in grade 9, our guidance teacher called each of us in groups of 3. What do you want to do when you leave school? One cousin, a couple years earlier than that, had gone on and said, "I want to be a psych nurse." And he looked her in the eye and said, "You better think again. That really isn't the type of profession that you should go into." And he was trying to steer her towards things that did not need any more education, which we interpreted as a racial slur. So I was all prepared for this when I went in, and I happened to go in with a cousin, and she wasn't sure what she wanted to do.
There's power in numbers.
Well, our 3 of us went in a group A, and it so happened that another Lafayette was there, and we went in. And the one guy whose marks were just pathetic said he wanted to be a doctor. And at that time, I was a straight A student, and this chap's marks were he was just barely passing, and he said he wanted to be a doctor. And the guidance counselor did not discourage him, which I took note of, and I thought, that is very unfair. Here's somebody who is going to be lucky to get out of grade 12, and he's being encouraged. I mean, he's not being discouraged. The guy said, "Okay, do you realize you have to do this and this and this?" So he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, "I'd like to go into broadcasting." And he looked me in the eye and he said, "Alan, do you realize that there are no blacks in broadcasting in Canada?" And I said, "That could be." I said, "I really don't know." And he says, "Well, don't you think you should be more realistic?" And I said, "Well, that's what I want to do." I said, "I can do whatever I want." I said, "If I have the skills, I'll do it." And he suggested that perhaps I should be more realistic and start thinking about what life would be like for me afterwards, and perhaps that I might want to take a janitorial job.
Oh, come on.
No, this is serious.
Oh,
this is
I don't believe
No,
it.
this is serious.
Oh.
This is serious. He was very, very serious about that after I got out of high school, I had to be realistic because of who I was and what color I was. And he obviously had no precepts of our family and what they were doing at all, my city relatives. He had no idea. And it could be that he was ill because about a year later, I think it was into the next year, that he had a nervous breakdown and did leave the school system. At least for that time, he never did come back. So it could be that was part of the problems, but that was what happened. I was encouraged to be more realistic because of my ethnic background and perhaps manual labor or whatever.
So when you went to Lethbridge, you got into broadcasting.
Yeah, and I think that, in all honesty, that spurred me on more than anything, that this man had the nerve to tell me that I should start thinking about unskilled labor or whatever.
Also at that time, there weren't many women in broadcasting either.
No, this is true too. My graduating class, we started with about 30 and ended up with 13. And out of 13, there were 2 women that stuck it out. That's true.
Were they discouraged, do you think?
The women? No, because they happen to have the nice, soft, sexy voices. So they were encouraged all along that, hey, you will be able to get a lot of commercial work.
Okay, but those 2, again, of course, that was a sort of sexist.
Yeah, a sexist thing, but they happened to have the nice voices. So.
But what about the ones that dropped out, or the ones that never even entered? Did you feel any sort of kinship with with the women in your class?
No, no, not really. Other than we became good friends, but
So you didn't feel any pressures once you got into the course?
no, no, not at all. Not at all in the least.
Lethbridge was a good time for you?
Lethbridge was a very good time for me. I tested people's notions because the first drama production was a musical, You're a
What
Good Man,
part did
Charlie
you play?
Brown, and I tried out for Charlie Brown, but I didn't have the skills. I knew that right from the start, but I wanted to see, will I get a part in this at all? And I got to play Schroeder, and which was quite interesting because on opening night, there were a lot of children in the audience, and you could hear, we were so close to the audience, who is he supposed to be? Because they had just introduced a black character, I can't remember his name, into the cartoons, but I can't remember his name, into the Peanuts cartoons. But they kept saying, who is he? I can hear this whenever the play went quiet. And, well, he's Schroeder, he's playing the piano. You know, the children had already identified with this black character, which I thought was amusing.
Well, the children always can identify quickly.
Yeah. There were a lot of Americans at the college. A lot of black basketball players came up to play basketball in Lethbridge. And there were a lot of American teachers. It's a Mormon community, and a lot of the instructors were Mormon.
Now that's interesting because until recently, you know,
we were
Mormons
not allowed
weren't
into
allowed
the
in the church.
Well, we were allowed into church, but we were not going to go to the higher part of heaven. That was interesting. I had the Mormons had a situation on campus where as soon as you hit town, they welcomed you to Lethbridge and wanted you to come to their church dances and all this. And it was really an effective way of building up their churches. And this one guy who was also in broadcasting came trucking up to me and my friend, well, why don't you come out to our youth thing and all this stuff. And I looked him in the eye and I said, are you sure you want me? And he goes, well, why not? And he sort of started turning red because I don't know if he understood what the intent of mine was. And I said, well, you have a little chat with your youth leader or minister or whatever, because I didn't know too much about the church. And then you see if you really want me to come out to your activities. And so from then on, I don't know if this was his first introduction to their racial attitudes, but then from then on, whenever I saw him, he had little red cheeks. He was still quite friendly, but it was quite interesting.
You moved from Lethbridge back to Saskatoon and got a job here?
Mm-hmm.
What was the reaction to you then?
Just another person. We had another black person working at CFQC, Carl Nicholas, who I believe is from Trinidad or Jamaica. Trinidad. Yeah. And he was there, and everybody was used to him. He's a very nice guy, easygoing, and I don't think there was really that much. There was one racist person on staff who happened to be a Jewish person on staff also, and he gave us, you know, racial jokes and things that were off color at times, but nothing that you don't meet anywhere.
So in your professional life, you found that it's been your ability that has always been what counted?
Yes, oh yes. I don't think that, possibly because I'm behind the scenes too, I don't know what it would be like if I was on television and people had to look at me every day, read the news or...
Do you think that Saskatchewan is ready for that? For a black announcer? Or on the air?
I don't know. I know I worked for just 6 weeks in a station in Alberta in Red Deer, which happened to be a radio and TV station. And when I came in to meet the manager, it was quite an uncomfortable situation because, well, when I went down for the interview, I was sitting in the hall and the guy came out and said, well, where's Mr. Lafayette? And I was the only guy sitting there.
He was expecting a guy French with a French accent.
Which happens quite often to us. And he goes, oh, and so that's when I'm back. Well, well, isn't this nice? We had our interview, and I got the job. And so then he took me in to meet the manager when I finally came down, had the job. And the manager raised his eyes, oh! And he started saying what he was thinking, which was interesting. Well, we can certainly use him. He'll certainly add some color to our commercials. He could model some clothes for us, couldn't he? And it seemed like he was thinking what he was saying, and it seemed like I would have been a novel little thing to put on the air.
Stream of consciousness here.
Or something interesting, novel to throw on. So that was interesting.
Well,
I think that's
in Canada, there's no real quota system as there is in the States in terms of hiring.
No.
So there's not those considerations.
No, not at all, which I think is unfortunate for our native Indians, because as I said earlier, we got to watch eventually blacks started to be portrayed on television in shows like Julie on the Bill Crosby Show, etc., in positive lights, where they were not servants and doing menial labor. And I think our Native Indians are really lacking something, because the only show that they have any kind of representation on, as far as I know, is basically the Beachcombers. And there again, you do not see professional people, you do not see well-educated people, and I think that's a real lack. In Canada, you will quite often see blacks in newspaper ads in the Star Phoenix quite often for Eaton's and Sears and the Bay and even Zellers. And you never see Native Indians. You know, they even had Woco had a flyer not too long ago where you had a handicapped girl in a wheelchair modeling clothes, which I think is absolutely great, but you never do see the Indians. I was commenting to a coworker the other day. We had 3 black girls modeling clothes in one of our newspaper ads, and I said, you know, I am proud to see that and quite happy to see that, but why not some Indians in their ads ever? You know, I think that we as Canadians are very shamefully treating the Indians, and we're not giving them any help at all in positive ways on television or anything. You know, they have no role models at all, which I started to have as a child, and I think were very important for me.
You married recently, and you married a German girl, well, Canadian, but of German background. What sort of things went on before the marriage? What sort of reaction did your parents have to the marriage?
Well, on the Lafayette side of the family, intermarriage is something that has always been quite common. My grandfather's wife, his first wife, had a considerable amount of white blood in her. And so my relatives, really, some of them really don't look totally black. We've always looked like we have something in us, and you know what, something in us. And our family reunions and family gatherings are always, you know, lots and lots and lots of Caucasian people. So the Lafayettes, there's no reaction at all. The question is asked always. What kind of girl are you married? And when they say what kind, they mean ethnically, you know, because we have no Orientals in the family yet, and we have no Native Indians in the family yet. So
well, there's hope, though.
Yeah. So, you know, it's a question that is asked, I must admit. But on my mother's side of the family, unfortunately, she wasn't living when I became engaged this time around. I had been engaged prior to that. And my mother had been brought up with the attitude that if you had married a white person, you probably would have a better chance in life to get ahead. And but she did not pass it on to us. She did not believe that herself for us, but she had been brought up that way. And so there again, they were quite curious.
Your father?
My mother's family. My father didn't phase him at all. I think he naturally expected that the person I married would be white, because there are virtually no blacks around. Most of the black women in Saskatoon, even presently, are from the islands, and I would say that our family's reaction here in town, and my cousins that live here, is that the people from the islands, in most cases, want absolutely nothing to do with the Native people. Whenever we have gone to the Come Together Club or have tried to meet people on campus at the university or whatever, there seems to be an air of superiority, so a superior air.
On their part.
On their part. I have one friend here, one Jamaican friend, and in joking, he quite often says that we have too much mixed blood in us, and that we are not pure. And I remind him, in fun, this is all in fun, that the Jamaicans do not land on the island without any mixed blood themselves, but there seems to be this attitude.
Are you aware that there's a Black Cultural Association in Saskatchewan?
Yes.
Do you ever go to
recently
the meetings?
aware? No, I have not.
Why not?
Okay, to be quite honest, since I have now married a white person, I'm wondering what the reaction is. I haven't investigated the situation enough.
I'll tell you what the reaction would be. Half the people that go there are white.
I definitely have intentions of contacting them, but that is one question I have in the back of my mind.
I've gone to 2 meetings. Half the people are white. There's only a few Canadian blacks. It seems to me that the West Indians are running the show.
Hmm. So there, as I said, trying to find a black girl was never really the purpose. I think when I was about 14 or 15, I wanted that black family that I saw on TV, and we were going to have black kids with great big long afros and the whole works, and we were going to be black. But I grew out of that stage very, very quickly, I think. I don't really, color was never really an issue for me. But to find, if that was a goal, I think that a black person who wants to marry another black person, if they are a native black in Canada, would have to do a lot of hard work to look. Out of the 17 children that grew up at that farm site where we grew up, only one has married a black person.
And where was that person from?
He was from Ghana, and the marriage did not last very long.
Too many cultural differences?
I would say that there were a great deal of cultural differences there, yes. Yeah. Oh, you asked about the parents' reaction.
Yeah,
on my wife's side of the family. They were not thrilled at first. Where are
they from?
They are basically from Saskatchewan, and both parents have a Mennonite background. And they were not thrilled at first because most of the information that you've learned in school, you get married to someone of a different skin color, and what are the children going to be brought up with? That was a question that they definitely did raise. Children, there's going to be prejudice for your children. Can you face the struggle? And the family also had no contact with black people as much as I know, and they really thought that there would be great cultural differences. And they're
Even though you had both been born and raised in Saskatchewan, and you knew no other culture.
Right. This is something that most people do not realize. Most people that I meet really think that we have a group of black people somewhere that we hang out with all the time, and we are all into what they see on TV, sort of like the family on Good Times or whatever, where our lifestyle is substandard, and we sneak back into some area. And
well, the Lafayettes have their good times, but it's not those kind of good times.
Yeah, that's basically the Lafayettes. We've been brought up the same as any family on the street, and so we have no ethnic or things that would be any different at all. So they were concerned about that. In fact, my mother-in-law did give my wife a book written, I believe it was a religious book, on problems in interracial marriages. And
it sounds like a very natural reaction.
Yeah, I think it was. Oh no, there was no spite there. I expected it to be much worse because I had problems earlier. One girl I went out with in Regina, and we were very much in love. I think the main reason for the breakup was that the pressure kept being, your grandfather is going to drop dead if he ever finds out. You've got to break this up. And it kept going on and all these pressures. You can't carry this on. This is breaking your mother's heart. And the father would turn, the mother would say, you can't do this, this is breaking your father's heart, and vice versa. And there was all sorts of pressure put on. Up until the time that we started going out, they liked me, and they'd shop in my store and all this kind of stuff when we'd talk. But once it started going out seriously with the daughter, things really cooled off. But I think after I started coming over and we started talking, our Christianity was a common thing that we could talk about. And they started to see that I had been brought up in the same way. And I think that my wife had a lot of talks, like half of Alan's family is white, and they're the same. They're the same. I think that was something that she had to do on her own, because we have briefly talked about these things. I think that after they did meet my relatives at the wedding, that they were quite surprised, because a lot of my relatives have turned out to be quite successful in business and in a lot of their endeavors, and I think that they realized, and her relatives realized, that hey, we're just the same as everybody else. And obviously we have people in our family that they would not be thrilled with, and there are people in our family that they would like,
Yeah. You mentioned your Christianity. Now, you say you're Pentecostal. Did that originate way back in Iowa? Has there been a continuation?
As far as I understand, my great-grandparents were Methodist, and at Oskaloosa, a traveling evangelist came through, and they started having church services in the Lafayette home and also at the school. And I don't think Pentecostalism is not something that all of the relatives were raised as. They were Christians, and that's basically all I know. They brought them up as Christians to love God and basically follow the Bible precepts. And Pentecostalism basically is something that started, I guess, with my own grandfather's family, Carl's family, and a few of his daughters, and my father have chosen that as their denominational belief. But
now you said that you sold records, gospel records in Regina for Sunshine?
Sunshine Unlimited. We had opened up.
Now can you explain what that is?
Sunshine Unlimited, I had been working at Kelly Stereo Mart managing the record department, and I really felt that at the time, it was a period in my time when I was very upset with a lot of the song lyrics that were in the lyrics of songs, and I was quite concerned about how people were spending their money. Young children in particular. I felt that if you're 18, 19 years old and you hear song lyrics that are rather suggestive morally, that's fine, you're old enough. But it was my observation, because our prices were so low, that a lot of young people were coming in and spending their money on this. And I sort of started to feel that this was not the job for me because of what I was doing. I thought that I was presenting material to children that was suggestive in nature, and really they weren't really old enough to grasp it. And because at that time, this was early disco days, and I think the lyrics of songs at the time were far more suggestive than even now. And so my aunts, Vera and Isabel, who are also Christians, we got together and really felt that something we would like to do would be open up a store, because a lot of kids had come in and had been asking for gospel music. A lot of gospel entertainers like Andre Crouch and the Disciples and people like that had been coming up to Regina and Saskatoon. So we opened the store. And
now, what year was that?
77, I think. And we opened that store and found out that it was meeting all sorts of needs socially. A lot of kids that were not Christians but had been kicked out of their homes and all sorts of things would come out and hang around the store, because
like any record store, really.
No, a little differently, because they'd hang around and come in the back and talk and spend. A lot of people would spend their whole afternoon there and talk and share their problems, and we would pray with them, encourage them. Occasionally, I would take people home, particularly males, because I was single at the time, home, and give them a place to stay if they were hitchhiking or whatever. It was starting to turn to that where we weren't making that much money from the sales, but we were meeting sort of people's needs socially or whatever. And when the store did enter financial difficulty, my aunts took over and I started working again with the hope that we would someday have more financial input to raise the store up. But it turned out that the feelings that my Auntie Vera had in particular were right, that it was should be more of a ministry where they were meeting the social needs of people. And so it's turned into a group home, and Auntie Vera has 2 homes. And there's a real Christian emphasis on it, because she was a social worker, and she has found that just issuing out orders and following guidelines and the rules and books that don't necessarily meet a lot of people's needs who are really, really hurting. And just because this is the practice that social workers use, sometimes it's too cold, and people really have to have a chance to express themselves.
Who's living at the group homes?
Basically, there is a bit of government funding, and so these are people who are having mental problems, not necessarily mentally ill where they have to be confined to an institution.
Psychological.
But where they can't really relate, they can't hold a job. Males and females and young adults, and basically social problems. And most of them have had really rough problems growing up, where the parents were indifferent and didn't care, or their marriages have fallen apart, and because they couldn't hold up their own end of it.
Is it a non-profit organization?
Definitely. My 2 aunts really have a really interesting source. When they pray, God really answers their prayers, and money comes in just in the nick of time quite often. and they're two really marvelous ladies, and that's basically, I guess, really all I can say about that home.
Yeah, well, that's really
yeah.
interesting. Let's talk a little bit about your comparison, say, of Regina and Saskatoon. Do you see any differences in the cities in relation to you? Like Regina, for example, has a lot more Indians and seems to have a few more problems.
Well, while I was working in Regina, I worked at the big rock and roll station, and so then I went to Kelly Stereo Mart. And while I was in Kelly Stereo Mart, you're caught into the trap of dressing hot and cool, sort of the look that you saw on television for American blacks. And you had a following of customers, who thought of you as being cool, and you knew what was happening. Disco was just starting to come in, and I had a real love for that kind of music at the time, so I filled the store and was right on top of what was happening. And so the black American football players basically shopped at our store, and I sort of had a good rapport with the blacks that were in town at that time.
Was that really the first time you got really close to American blacks?
As close as I have been. I have never really been that close to them.
How did you relate to them, and what did they think of you?
Well, okay. I can't remember the phrases and the terminology, but they'd say things, and I didn't know how to respond. I really didn't. I felt I felt like I was white, and I'd go, "Pardon?" And it took me a while to realize how to respond.
But you studied it just like you studied before you went to Lethbridge.
No, not quite as much, because it always caught me on. To be quite honest, I did not feel comfortable, because I always felt, oh dear, they're going to say or do something, and I'm going to look like a fool, because they had to walk, and they come striding into the store, and everybody would sort of stop and look, which didn't bother me, because I was studying these walks and things. But then they'd come up and, I can't remember, my mind has gone blank for the terminology. But it was just a greeting, and I would respond by giving them an answer, and they'd take a second look.
Like, what's happening?
Yeah, there's one. Yes, there's one. I haven't heard that for a long time.
Say hi.
Yes, and I'd go, what's happening? And I'd give them a response. Not too much or whatever, and they'd give me a second look. So I sort of felt really ostracized. But they were very friendly, and I think
Were they curious about you and your history?
Not the history. Occasionally, they would just ask, where were you born? And if you said Canada, they would be just, oh, really? Andre Crouch, who is a great gospel artist, my Auntie Vera and I met him backstage here in Saskatoon, and he was quite startled that there were blacks up in this cold climate. And we also met Ray Charles in Regina after an episode with one of my aunts, and he too was quite surprised. He being blind, he came right out and asked my Auntie Carol what color she was. And she said that she was black, and he was very, very surprised. And we had quite a nice little chat with him. He just couldn't believe that there were blacks out there in the audience.
This is the thing. A lot of people don't know you exist. They don't know of your life.
Well, it's always the question whenever you fill out an application form, hospital or credit cards or whatever. Not that it's necessary for their papers, but they always ask the question just out of curiosity, how long have you lived in Canada? I remember one bus ride I was on, a Greyhound bus, and this lady sits down, where are you from? And I said, Rosetown. Where's that? Saskatchewan. How long have you lived there? All my life.
She couldn't believe it?
Just laughing. She thought I was trying to be funny. And I was getting quite angry. and I said, and my father was born there too. Oh! She tapped the woman ahead of her and said, can you believe this? He's trying to tell me that his father was born here in Canada. Which was very, very, very annoying.
And then you said, and my grandfather came in 1909?
Yeah. That is something that people will not believe, even here in Saskatoon, old-timers. When you say that you have roots in Canada, in Saskatchewan, that are almost as old as the province, they cannot believe that at all. Older people who have settled here, well, I never saw anybody like that before. And when you say agriculture, too, that your roots are in farming, that is even harder to believe. Like if you had worked in the city and had...
Or on the CPR.
Yeah, or something like that. It might be more believable, but to have had a farm, that is really something. I remember when I was in Vernon and applying for my driver's license, the woman there, she said, where are you from? And I said, Rosetown. and she asked how to spell Roast Town. I don't know if my diction was that bad or not. And then she says, now let me see. And she really wanted to put on the sophisticated